Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of the Daily Fix. I am your usual host and presenter, Advocate Tuloyane. This afternoon, I want to deal with the issue of bias that have descended in the MEYIWA trial on the part of Judge Ratha ever since this trial began. And it is unfortunate to see this kind of development because ideally, judges are supposed to be impartial. But when a perception arises in a court of law that the judge is leaning to one side or another, that can have very disastrous consequences for the administration of justice. Let me get straight into the point. I am referring here to the way that Judge Ratha has approached the issue of that forged affidavit by Absalom, allegedly deposed to by Absalom Zungu. This affidavit, you'll recall, was put before the court by the prosecution. It was given an exhibit reference, triple U, in brackets 1. And nobody said anything about it. At that stage, when it was handed in, it was manifest hearsay, patent hearsay, and nothing else. So at a later stage, the prosecution then called upon Brigadier Gininda. And Brigadier Gininda told the Pretoria High Court, without any hesitation, that it was on the basis of that affidavit that accused number 1 and 2 were arrested. In other words, they were arrested following the disclosures allegedly by Absalom Zungu contained in that affidavit. In other words, the affidavit formed the basis upon which he then decided to arrest the 2 accused persons, accused 1 and 2. That affidavit, that evidence has always been hearsay and remains hearsay up to today. But it is hearsay of a kind because it is not only just hearsay evidence, but it was also forged. Because you see, the person behind it clearly now is Gininda. It cannot be Absalom Zungu, because Zungu has come before the Pretoria High Court and denounced that affidavit, that he never deposed to it, let alone sign it. So all along, as Gininda gave that evidence regarding this same affidavit, no issues were raised around whether or not it was hearsay evidence. And the court was perfectly comfortable to go along with it. The prosecution was perfectly comfortable to go along with it. And I still maintain that from the very onset, the defense should have attacked this kind of evidence. But of course, it was not easy at that stage because the prosecution had made this promise to the court that at some stage they would cure that hearsay evidence by actually calling the person who had deposed to that affidavit, and that person being Absalom Zungu. It became apparent along the way that Absalom Zungu would never come before the Pretoria High Court to testify on behalf of the prosecution, because clearly he was not going along with their fraud or their fraudulent intentions. Gininda tried on 2 occasions at least to try and persuade him to come forward to falsely testify that he had overheard a conversation, or he had been told about the conversation, which is even worse. He had been told about the conversation that had been a conversation between accused number 1 and 2, allegedly by one Mbekiseni Zungu, who has not testified before the Pretoria High Court. So it was triple hearsay, like the court has rightly pointed out. But in the hands of the prosecution, nobody raised this triple hearsay thing. Not much was said about the triple hearsay. So, but when the prosecution failed, after those frantic efforts to try and get Absalom Zungu to come and testify, it was then left to the defense to call Absalom Zungu to come forward to vouch for the veracity or otherwise of that affidavit. No sooner has Absalom Zungu started testifying, the court all of a sudden makes up its mind that this is hearsay evidence. This evidence is unhelpful to the court, it is worthless. As if this evidence, as presented by the defense now, is something new. And it was not something new. It was something that the court had always been aware of and had in fact condoned and tolerated, because Gininda was on the stand for days and perhaps weeks talking about this non-starter of an affidavit. So now we see the court having taken a position long before, the trial even ends or comes to an end, that this is worthless evidence. Now, how does the bias come into it? The bias of the court comes specifically in the way in which it now wants to treat that evidence. When that evidence was in the hands of the prosecution, there was no indication at all coming from Judge Ratha in that this is hearsay evidence and it is worthless. But as soon as the same evidence comes into the hands of the defense, it then becomes worthless and not worthy of any consideration by the court. I think this displays an attitude, an unmistakable attitude on the part of Judge Ratha, that he is showing bias towards the prosecution and is treating the defense unfairly. And we have seen this in all other respects, or in all other manner of ways in which he has treated the defense. And this, in my own view, this treatment of this forgery by Gininda, this so-called affidavit, is a clear indication that the time is ripe for the defense to call for the recusal of Judge Ratha. Because I do not think it would be in the interest of justice at all to have a presiding officer that is perceived to be leaning towards one or other side. In this case, it is a prosecution. If the defense, rather, does not bring up this recusal application, it will simply mean that they are condoning what is going on in the Pretoria High Court. They must come up with the recusal application and see where it goes. Because clearly, there is a lot of dissatisfaction about what is going on in that courtroom. People across social media, mainstream media, everybody is worried. And these are just the sort of issues that people are worried about. So this afternoon, going into the evening, I am saying Judge Ratha's treatment of that affidavit is unacceptable. At one stage, in the hands of the prosecution, it is supposed to be evidence. When it lands in the hands of the defense, it then becomes worthless hearsay evidence. Having said that, let me thank you for watching this video. Let me thank you for all the views, subscriptions, and likes that I'm seeing. And have a wonderful, wonderful evening and afternoon. Thank you.